Hello and welcome to the Harley Fair Online. My name is Ben Evans and I am the editor of Harley magazine. I'd like to introduce our visit to Tbilisi and explain a little bit of background behind it. We've been lucky through our work with Harley Tours to visit Georgia and Tbilisi a number of times over the last few years, and it's always been a highlight on our trips for our visitors, both in terms of the food and wine, the ambience of the city, and the material that we've discovered in the collections. However, each time we have tried to visit a collection of kilims from Tushetian, which is a region in Georgia just north of Tbilisi, the open air museum, which houses this collection, has never quite managed to present the kilims to us and our group for various logistical reasons. Therefore, this exhibition, which was filmed especially for the Harley Fair Online in a special venue in Tbilisi, is the fruition of many years of work on our behalf, but most importantly on behalf of our two key contributors, Dr. Irina Koshridze and my colleague Cosima Stewart, who will introduce the exhibition and tell you a little bit of the background about Tushetian kilims. Following this, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that you can join us for a few of our other presentations as well.
Today, here in Tbilisi, Georgia, we have brought together 14 kilims from Tushetian. The space is in a caravanserai. It houses the Tbilisi History Museum, and it was for a long time the central point for traders coming to the city. No longer a caravanserai, it's now a museum and an exhibition gallery space. These 14 Tushetian kilims, 3 of them are from the Ethnographic Museum in Tbilisi, and 11 are from private collections in Tbilisi. They will be shown to you by Dr. Irina Koshridze, Chief Curator of the Oriental Collections at the Georgian National Museum.
Today we will talk about the Georgian cultural heritage and very interesting part of Georgian textile production, which is not well known in the textiles world, but it's very interesting and oldest part of Georgian carpet and rug weaving culture. This is Tushetian kilims. Tusheti is mountain region of Georgia, which is located on the northeast part of Georgia. And it was during the centuries, it was connected to the Eastern Georgian kingdom, Kakhetian kingdom. Tushi people were Christians, and they had sheep breeding, so they had a semi-nomad style of life, and they moved from highlands, from their native Tushetian mountains, to lowlands, to Kakhetian kingdom values. Their life was seasonal, and they moved from up to down. And during their lifestyle, they had available a lot of wool, and they used kilims for their own purpose. They never produced kilims for international market, and these traditions continue till today. That's why it's not well known on the international carpet market. But fortunately for us, Tushetian kilims survived because of close geographic location of mountains, and because their conservative style of life continued till end of 19th century. From end of 19th century, they started to move finally to lowlands, and now most of Tushi are living in 2 or 3 villages in Kakheti, near Tel Aviv, in Zemo Alvani and Kvemo Alvani. From time to time, they are going up to mountains, but it's only in summer. But they still are sheepbreds, and they still are producing wonderful Tushetian cheese. They still have wool, and they still are weaving kilims. These kilims, which I want to introduce you, most of them are kept in museum collections, and some of them are in the private collections. As I mentioned, the Tushi were Christians, and they had a semi-nomad style of life, but they had in their native homes furniture, in difference with in other countries, which are mostly Muslim countries, and they used floors as main style of life. And Tushi had furnitures, Tushi had cupboard, they had beds, and these kilims were used not for floors, but mostly for decoration of their walls. You can see here two shapes of Tushetian kilims, horizontal shape kilims, which they are hanged alongside the beds. And another style of kilims, which are square shape, and they used them also for decoration of their walls. Very rarely Tushi had kilims on the floors. The distinguished stylistic feature of Tushetian kilims is mostly they use two colors. This is black, which is mostly natural black, and white, which also was natural. And these two colors created main structure of Tushetian kilims. And this color also was traditional for Georgian traditional attires and Tushetian traditional dress, which was black, and it was aligned with silver decorations in women's case, and with silver arms and armories in men's case. One of the most distinguished features of Tushetian kilims composition are crosses. As I mentioned, Tushi were Christians, and you can see everywhere crosses. You can see different shapes of crosses like this. You can see more elaborate shape of crosses. You can see crosses in different arrangement when they are main motifs. You can see crosses between the main motifs. This gives to Tushetian kilims additional importance and additional flavor, let's say. And also we can say that some of the kilims they used for very special, like weddings, or some special gifts for dowry when the artisans weaved for themselves. This is in general what we can say about Tushetian kilims, but if you go deeper, there are different techniques which they used, different symbols and main motifs, and we can go through the exhibition and see all these details. We have about 150 kilims which are kept in the private museums, collections and museums, but most of them are weaved in slit tapestry technique. But we have a small group of kilims, which we call mixture technique, when they use piles to underline main motifs, and they used piles, not cover with piles all area of kilim, but only part of them to separate some main motifs. This kilim is particularly interesting. At first, it is 1/4 part of a big kilim. You can imagine how big it could be. And if you look to composition, there are only crosses here, and you cannot find any composition like this in another part of the world. And the most interesting in this kilim, which has piles from on the parts of them, that as you see, they use, as I mentioned, also white color, white contour lines, which are underlying the main motifs, like Khevsuretian cross motifs. We call these motifs Khevsuretian crosses because we have a lot of them in Khevsuretian traditional embroidery. And blue and white are major colors in these motifs, of course with black background. And from on small parts we have also orange and purple. Orange and purple were two colors which were introduced firstly. They are synthetic colors which were introduced to Caucasia carpet weaving in 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and only these two colors were used by Tushi for weaving kilims and kilims with piles. And later, of course, the additional colors were used, but this is typical, and these two colors, dating them sometimes, because when we have only these colors, we know that they are definitely from the period of 70s, 80s of 19th century. Most of the Tushetian kilims which which we have now, they have square shapes, but most of them are consist two parts. They weaved one part, another part, and after they sewn together these parts, and it created the square shape. It was because the village looms were narrow, and it's very typical for village kilims, to which group the Tushetian kilims belong. If we move to this kilim, it shows you how these two parts were sewn together. And usually most of Tushetian kilim, have a square structure. And you see here how these two parts are going together, and sometimes they are not very precise. For example, here we have triangle, and here we have not this triangle, but we know that it's definitely two parts of one kilim because it's going together very precisely. And sometimes we have these horizontal lines which separate the rows. Sometimes they are just lines, but sometimes are small additional small motifs of triangles or small crosses like this. But here we have blue color. Blue is also interesting. It's indigo, definitely, but we have accounts that Tushi could get from another plant, the blue colors, because in general, for blue color, they used lila khane, the special workshops. And these workshops existed in Georgia from 17th, 18th century, and the wool was collected and brought to mainlands, and after it was returned and used again. And blue is also very typical and distinguished for Tushetian kilims. The running dogs are very often used by Tushetian weavers. They like these motifs, and these motifs giving the more dynamic feeling to Tushetian kilims. They never are static or dynamic. This is always balance between dynamic diagonal lines, which are created, for example, in this kilim, and static motifs, which memling motif have this shape. Here you see kilim, which is like final stage of all the Tushetian kilims. We have here date, 1920, and we have also some figures, letters, Georgian letters we have in several Tushetian kilims. Usually they are names of weavers. Beside the date, this kilim is very interesting because it shows us influence of another kilims with which they became familiar when they moved to the lowlands. You see here different medallions, which definitely came from pile carpets, but Tushetian weavers still try to keep them in the shape of old traditions. And you see here, not very black, very dark brown colors, which they used for background, and still blue color, which was typical for Tusheti, and these white lines, which are typical for Tushetian kilims, and crosses, of course. And another very interesting piece of Tushetian kilim, which shows us different artistic approach to compositional structure of kilim, which is not usual for old kilims, when we have two medallions, and these medallions are arranged on the central axis of the composition. This kilim is very dynamic. You can see a lot of movement here. You can see totally different border. You can see figures which remind us some figures, some motifs of Tree of Lives. And it's more intense compositional structure of this kilim. And besides the different structure, it has the same artistic expression. It has black, it has white, it has diagonals and rhombs, and it has a lot of crosses, which filling all area of this kilim. So this is like a final accord of Tushetian kilims, because it keeps the old traditional canons, how all the kilims were structured, but also it has some influences from another schools of kilim weaving. And at the same time, we know that this kilim also belong to the old group, because we have only two synthetic dyes here, which dating exactly this kilim by the maybe end of 19th century. And this is one of the very unusual and perfect piece of Tushetian kilims, with which I want to finish our introduction to Georgian Tushetian kilims.
Kirsle başı gaqi xek inç xosum tatı